That was practice.
Good rehearsal. That's why we rehearse. Start from over. Hello everyone, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. I'm Alberto Díaz Calleros, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies here at Stanford. Today we are here together for the Friday lecture, A Journey to Achieving Sustainability, Lessons from the Galapagos Islands, Ecuador, from Professor Arturo Izurieta Valery. Kindly note that this lecture is being live streamed and will continue to be available through our Center for Latin American Studies YouTube page after the event. If you have questions, please submit those or comments to the YouTube chat, and I will make sure that I make those questions available to our speaker. I do want to also note there is a technical glitch in that there's a couple of animations in the presentation of Dr. Izurieta, and those will not be able to be live streamed, but you will get back to the presentation as we move forward, so please be patient on that. For those of us who are here at Stanford, I want to remind us that we are in the land and the territory of the Ohlone original peoples. We want to offer our gratitude for this land, for the water, for the air that surrounds us, and I want to also remember, have us remember that we have to, learn more about the past, about the present, and about the future of the original peoples who are, the Ohlone people in this particular case, continue to be present in their homelands, never unceded lands, but also throughout their diasporas. Arturo Izurieta Valery, who is right now, I'm very happy to have him today here. He's our Tinker Visiting Professor at CLAS. He has a postdoctoral degree from the Charles Darwin University in Australia, with studies in participatory processes to evaluate and collaborate the collaborative management of protected areas in Northern Territory, Australia. He has a doctorate, a PhD in management and rural and natural systems at the University of Queensland, also in Australia. He has a master's degree in management and conservation of biodiversity at CATIE in Costa Rica, and a bachelor's degree in biology from the Catholic University in Ecuador. He has been a research associate at the Research Institute for the Environment and Livelihoods of Charles Darwin University in Australia since 2011. He has extensive experience, no one I can think of that would be able to give us this immersive experience of what Galapagos is and how to think about the future of Galapagos in the research and management of protected areas, more broadly on local communities in islands, emphasizing the relationship between environment, health, and human well-being. He has worked on this for more than 30 years in projects that facilitate the relations between government authorities, local actors, academia, and science from Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands, Australia, Malaysia, and Central America. Arturo, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here at such a prestigious university with eager students to learn, and thanking as well the audience that is out there listening to my talk today. Before I continue on, I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. My respects to the Ohlone people, the past, the present, and the future. So I'm going to talk to you about today on the Galapagos Islands, but the theme of sustainability and sustainable development is key aspects of it. Briefly commenting on those terms, then we're going to pass on to the Galapagos context. Then as next part of the talk, walking through the steps or the efforts towards sustainable Galapagos, and then share with you the research that I started with the help of some students that I see here accompanying us today on the sustainability of the island of Floreana, and end up with final remarks. So we have to depart with a premise. and this is universal, must be universal. Healthy ecosystem and environments are needed to the survival of us all, humans and also the all living creatures that exist in the planet. So with that premise, we jump on the term of sustainability, which is a combined word that if we go to the Latin and what derives from the Latin sustinere, sustain, support, endure, and ability from Latin abilis, which means, apt, being able to be skillful, we summarize it as being able to maintain, whatever that is. That's sustainability. And the term was initially used in fisheries, what I've picked up from the literature. Basically, the property of the biological systems to remain diverse and productive indefinitely. So in the fishing industry, they really wanted to be sustainable to have the stocks of fish for the future. So entering into sustainable development, the term was used initially in 1987 during the Brundtland Commission, and I think that was Stockholm, if I'm not wrong, but the emphasis was in development that meets the needs of the present without comprising the ability of the future generation. So the intergenerational aspect is mentioned in this definition. Later on, and I like this definition from Herman Daly, defines sustainability or sustainable development as development without growth beyond environmental limits. So he brings in the environmental limits into the equation. And one that I have recently picked up, which is related to the studies, the academic, the science, he refers as an analytical field of a study that aims to explain and predict the complexity of the social environmental systems that govern us all. So, in the end, I think we come up with a simple graph that most of us have seen it around, and that tries to interpret that there's a need to have a balance between the social, the environmental, and the economic aspects as pillars of sustainability. But having a look at the term sustainability and sustainable development, I found that there are elements that coincide, that they share. They seek to prosper or do well economically and socially, with the intergenerational aspect, which is for the present and the future generations, and conserving the Earth's life support systems, nature, environment that feed us all. So with this brief introduction, then we jump into our case study, the Galapagos Islands. So where are the Galapagos Islands compared to where we are now? It's over 4,000 kilometers away, but they are islands that are off the coast of Ecuador, about 600 miles off the coast. And it's an archipelago that is composed by 13 major islands and more than 100 rocks and islets, with 4 inhabited islands, San Cristobal, Santa Cruz, Isabela, and Floreana. 97% of the landmass of the islands is national park, and surrounded by 138,000 square kilometers of protected area as a marine reserve. The population of Galapagos, the human population, is about 33,000 people distributed on these 4 islands that I just mentioned. Now, Galapagos is a place that is in constant formation. At least the ones that we have, the islands we have today, they appeared 3 to 5 million years ago. We had the last eruption last year, lasted 3 months, Volcano Isabela. And it's a unique place because I haven't really found more literature about a place that had the influence of so many ocean currents at the same time. Stronger or weaker depending on the season, but they are there, present, bringing lots of influences to the terrestrial area, special habitats and ecosystems that marine and terrestrial that have definitely been essential for the creation or the evolution of many species, and most of them are endemic. Marine birds are endemic to the islands. We have few species, cormorants, albatrosses, we have penguins right there on the equator. Patches of coral as well, and reptiles like the famous giant tortoise. All the reptiles are endemic with some few introduced ones, and birds, land birds like the mockingbirds and the Darwin finches that gave Darwin the inputs to develop his theory of the origin of a species through natural selection. But let's don't forget the marine environment, where we do have species that are essential for the health of the marine life in the region, but also important for fisheries, local artisanal fisheries in Galapagos, like lobsters and groupers, but also important for the tourism and conservation. The other important aspect of Galapagos is the recent colonization. Pretty much Galapagos as volcanic, they never had an indigenous population of humans, like in the Micronesia, for example. They were pretty much barren, empty. So I'm going to just highlight some of the key milestones that I consider important sharing with you. That's 1832, where the Galapagos Islands really are claimed by Ecuador as part of its territory. 3 years later, the famous naturalist arrives to the islands in 1835, Charles Darwin, who really put the Galapagos out to the world because of his theory. Another important landmark is the penal colonies that were established in Galapagos, but there is one that I think it's important because it was on the island of San Cristobal in the late 1800s, and it lasted until 1903. And when that was abolished, then many people migrated to other of the islands or stayed on the island of San Cristobal. The governance structures, the institutionalization of the islands it's important as well. The institutions that landed on the island or recently colonized island. So the national park was established in 1959, and along with the Galapagos National Park came the Charles Darwin Foundation, the Charles Darwin Research Station, and the administration of the Ecuadorian Institute, the National Park. In 1973, the Galapagos Islands become a province. So geopolitically speaking, the islands before 1973 belonged politically, or the decisions were taken in the mainland, in the province of Guayas. But in 73, it became independent, and of course that introduced the recognition of 3 municipalities, and of course elections to the dignitaries started since then, and the decisions were pretty much in the hands of the locals. In 1980 is the first efforts of the Ecuadorian government under the presidency of Ecuador to bring in together those municipalities and the national institutions to sit at a table and try to agree on what was the development that Galapagos would need for the future. But it was just about almost 18 years after that in many movements that were created in order to have a special law for the Galapagos Islands. The islands, fragile and unique, required a different legislation than the rest of the country. But in order to have a special law, the constitution of the country needed to be changed, because one of the articles, I think it's the 258, if I'm not wrong, said that any Ecuadorian could move freely and live freely in any part of Ecuador. And then the addition was except the Galapagos Islands. And when that took place, then the special law could have been formulated. And then with that first exercise that took years of discussions, it was pretty much finalized in 1998, restrictions to mobility and some other activities and reinforcement of conservation were put into place. And to implement that has been a long journey. So since 1998 until 2021, the sustainable development, the word sustainability, have been advancing as the time went by, and it is in 2015 where the Galapagos Sustainable Development and Good Living Plan picked up the term strongly, but it was too short of a plan. So the current one of 2021 had inserted into its planning the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that are inserted there, and they are being used for the implementation of the plan. So now we go a bit into the deeper concepts of sustainability and how they have evolved throughout time. And it's important to notice that Galapagos is seen as a social ecological system. It's in the words of the authorities, it's in the words of most of the planners nowadays. It came out during the 2006 management plan of the Galapagos National Park, and it has been reinforced in the 2014 management plan for the protected areas of Galapagos. So we have the social system and the natural capital, both of them interacting with human actions on the natural capital that provides the ecosystem services or ecological services. But they are, of course, subject to boosters of change, indirect and direct. The indirect are the local, national, and international, associated pretty much with the activities that the actors of the system takes place, and of course the change and the impacts on the natural system. And this concept of a socio-ecosystem for Galapagos that comes mainly from the planning exercises at the national park area also recommends that the inhabited islands work as a network. They should not be isolated or work on their own. They still tend to do that because they are independent local governments. So they have their own rules, they have their own council. Even though there's directions for the province, they sometimes just take their own actions. So the collaboration it's important. So we're going to go through the threats and challenges. There's many, but summarizing them. Galapagos has an annual population increase of 3.5%. It was more, but it was reduced with the law and took a bit of time. There's an increase of introduced species. As we speak, the threats are there. There's over 800 species of invasive plants. The last one and the complicated one is the Floreana fly. It's affecting the population of more than 15 land species of birds. Pressure from fisheries. They want more species, more amounts. Most of the artisanal fishing has been coastal, and the species like lobsters, newly fished sea cucumbers, groupers, and these other coastal species are going in decline, and they are asking for deep sea fishing now. Pressure to increase tour operators and visitor sites, and an exploration growth of tourism has been happening since the 1960s, the late 60s, where the organized tourism in Galapagos started. And with that increment of tourists along the time, poor urban and rural planning struck the islands. The cities have grown tremendously. No planning, or the planning is there, but not really capacity to follow the plans and the rules. And the public services have paid its toll too. Public services like potable water, hospitals, education, sewage systems are very, very precarious on the islands, and the municipalities cannot cope with this alarming exponential growth of tourism and, of course, local population. There's poor funding for science and conservation, even though there's more funding for science and conservation than for urban development and environmental aspects. Still, the funding for the maintenance of the natural capital is very poor. And the other threats and challenges, of course, are related with climate change and pollution that is not only coming from the islands themselves, but from many parts of the world as well. So with these threats and challenges, a question came up in 2012 by the then president of Ecuador: how many people can Galapagos hold? Not only tourists, but also residents there. And pretty much based on the studies that had been carried out in the past with modeling on various islands, particularly in Europe, Greece, Spain, on tourism there, then the study came on board. I was director of the recently appointed as director of the Galapagos National Park for the second time, and the minister by then told me, this is what the president wants, so you take it on board. All right? So there was, so leadership and political support, it was there. The leadership by the Ministry of Environment with the Galapagos National Park Directorate, and a straight political support from up top. It required interinstitutional cooperation from all the institutions in Galapagos and outside Galapagos, with a multi-interdisciplinary team of scientists from the natural and social scientists, mathematics, statistical people. And I managed to get a team and the support from WWF, World Wildlife Fund, from the University of San Francisco de Quito, and North Carolina, University of Chapel Hill, University of Cuenca, and many other institutions, CDF, Charles Foundation, because we required lots of information and data. And we managed to get data for 30 years on the most, you name it, sewage, population growth, health, labor, transportation, energy consumption, and so on and so forth. Introduced species, ecosystems, information, etc. So we used, the team used a system thinking approach to develop scenarios, modeling on what are those scenarios that could be shown and help for sustainability, and also identifying limits that it was called the point of no return, identifying those points of no return. So we need to find out the current situation of the island with all that information. And then we can see in this diagram the yellow curve is the tourists since 1972. That was until 2010, the information we gathered. The study was carried out in 2013, but I managed to update a little bit, 75,000 tourists in 2018. And that curve of tourists, the yellow one, really behaves similar to the one related with the local population there. So they go almost parallel. And of course that increase also relates to the increase of invasive species, which is the red line. I'm colorblind, I think I'm reading the green. Is that green?
It's a light green.
Yeah. Light green, okay, thank you very much. So the light green, for those that are watching this live stream, is the green one. And then, of course, the other small one, but very pronounced one, is the demand for energy, in this case, fossil fuels. in that period of time. Another of the interesting findings was the information about the number of tourists and where they were going to. And since 2009, we found out that Galapagos was receiving more tourists that were using the towns as the base to develop their activities than the usual model, which is and still is just getting your package, getting your tour on a floating hotel, on a boat, and visiting town, any of the towns once a week. So since 2019, the locally based tourism started growing. And even nowadays, this is the tendency. So there has been a stable number here, but increasing. And can you imagine then, this one putting the pressure on the municipalities, and the growth is continuing. So with this, then, in the middle of the diagram, for those that are watching us live, the very close relationship is between the tourist and local residents. The more tourists, the more local residents, the more pressure, the more need for provision of services are there. So with all the information that we gathered of 30 years, there was a hard work of the team to identify those variables for sustainability that had the most robust information throughout the years that could be placed into the modeling system. Working, trying to adjust, gaps of information using mathematics and algorithms and so on. So we identify these as the main ones. And of course, if you have a look at any of these, they would be within the social realm of the system, of the social system, or it would be within the natural realm of the social ecological system. So with all that vital information and identifying those indicators, then the complexity of finding the relationship between them and what effect would each of those would have on the other one, work on the causal loops of the modeling. And this is just a tiny bit. I'm not going to explain the whole thing. This is just to show you the complexity of the work that the team and the institutions had to deal with. So with all that info and the link between those elements, 3 scenarios were proposed in order to show the dynamics of the social ecosystem of Galapagos. And those 3 scenarios are linked with exponential growth of tourists or tourism, which is the first one here, the one that goes, can you help me with the color?
It's red.
Yeah. Red, thank you. For those out there, the red color. So the red color shows the exponential, and actually it's the tendency that is happening nowadays. We did have the break of 2019, the COVID 2019 in 2020, but we are back again into reaching the same amount where it was left out before COVID-19. So it's an exponential growth. Then the other scenario is, what about if we moderate the influx of tourists to a 3.8% annually? Because this one was going at 6%, and in some years were 11, 12%. A tremendous growth. And the other one is just stabilizing the number of tourists when the study started. So have the projections there at that pace. By 2032, 20 years later, we would have business as usual, 900,000 tourists. Then reducing the influx would be over 300,000 and just around 200,000 if a stabilization would have taken place. Now, we knew that The curves with the local population are similar. So there you go, the similar behavior of the curves with a projection of population growth at the pace of geometrical growth of tourism. We could reach in 2032 just about 110,000 inhabitants. Then the other one, the intermediate one, would probably reach just over 40,000 inhabitants, and the other one just over 30,000, reaching 40,000 as a normal birth rate if the tourism growth is just stabilized. Now, of 100 and more parameters studied, I'm going to show you just a few of them and what is the impact of the different 3-year scenarios on some of these parameters. So what is the impact of geometric growth and moderate growth of tourism and a stabilization model or into these ones right here, into these parameters. So the land occupancy, when we go to the first one, land occupancy, at the time of the study, by 2022, we would have reached 100% of land occupancy on the islands. And even though we had the break of COVID 2019, I think we're probably almost reaching that stage now. And with a moderate, just visualizing reaching that 90% in 2033. When we go to saturation of visitor sites, by the time of the study and being a director of the national park, I knew that we had just reached some of the visitor sites near the towns already to be in a saturated stage. So this is what the projections of the study shows. By 2017, we've reached already, and by 2020, in fact, as we speak, the Galapagos National Park is already working on the extension of more or current and or more visitor sites near the towns, because the overwhelming arrival of tourists to the sites it's impressive. The reaching ecological point of no return, which is related to the invasive species altering the natural ecosystems in the geometric growth. I mean, more tourists, more influx of goods and services. And we have the years there by 2026, if business as usual, if nothing was done, reach some of them, particularly those ones related with ecosystems near or on inhabited islands, would reach the point of no return. And the last one, the destabilization by 2033, if nothing is done in some of the inhabited islands. The other figures were related to the numbers of production of waste and energy that will be projected in the different scenarios. So the recommendations of the study would be where the stabilization of number of tourists by 2017. I mean, we've reached 270,000 tourists already. Limiting the flight frequencies to the islands and increase the entrance fee to the park. Limiting the flight frequencies until these days have not been considered properly, at least increase entrance to the fee. Various studies have been made. A willingness to pay exercise. A couple of them shows that tourists are eager to pay up to $360 to enter the park, but if there's some investment in improving the services for those tourist activity. So the other recommendation is investing in services like transport, better services at restaurants, hotels, internet, and so on. strict and improved quarantine capacities. The Galapagos Biosecurity Agency is struggling to really cope with the pressure of the cargo that arrives to the islands. The dock in Guayaquil, we've been fighting 30 years. Now there is money coming in for conservation, and there's still no political decision to build the dock for the Galapagos, which has already a property just about 6 years ago, with the proper infrastructure for a proper inspection of all the goods that are put on the ships that are going to the Galapagos Islands. Improve the budget for the Galapagos National Park Directorate. The marine reserve is very extensive. Now there's another area that is put on the shoulders of the Galapagos National Park Directorate, is that the Marine Reserve Hermandad Brotherhood that connects with Marine Reserve and Cocos Island up in the north in Costa Rica. Science and education, we talked about that, and the need to reinforce the funding to generate information for the ecological systems, capacities of municipalities to really implement and plan and have a good direction of how the cities or the small towns cope with the increase of tourism and provide with the good services, education, health, electricity to the local people. Reduce the use of fossil fuels and improve mobility. And another recommendation is generate capacity to assess and monitor the behavior of Galapagos. This exercise here did leave behind the tool and the exercise where the institutions were to contribute to raise the information, to accumulate the data that could be put into this system and have an opportunity to show the decision makers the best ways to go on the sustainability of Galapagos. And last but not least, the community needs to be informed, and the community needs to be participating strongly in the decisions, because the top-down approach has mainly been part of the development of Galapagos. You know, taking advantage of democracy, you are elected and they do whatever they like, but the spaces for participation, they are very poor. They are just starting, and this is something that I will show that to you. So my own reading about the situation is that sustainable development or sustainability is unstable. You know, those three pillars are not the same size. The economic development, the interest of tourism are dominating. You know, stumbling the environmental protection, leaving as the second one where the concept is being put attention to, but the social aspect of Galapagos being left behind. I know that it's important to fight for the environment because it's what supports all living human livings on the islands, but the social development is very poor and needs attention. Not to say the governance, which is required as an element of sustainability. Every 2 years we have elections. Would you believe that? So every 4 years, president and congress people, and every intermediate years we have elections of city councils and mayors. So, some evidence that we have made some progress. The social ecological system concept has been inserted into the regional planning, and the regional planning had already inserted the United Nations development goals, and the current plan has 5 axes, which is governance, habitat, economy, community, and environment. And lately as well, in order to help support the importance of implementing the plan and the SDGs, Galapagos Hub was created and approved by the Galapagos Government Council, where an external group of universities and research institutions would provide with support on sustainability, innovations, and resilience. And hopefully we can call the attention of Stanford with the new School for Sustainability to consider being part of this Galapagos Hub. Now, the participation of the communities is incipient, but there are spaces out there. It needs to be reinforced. It's happening, but it requires much more political decision, but also requires the push from the bottom, from the local either citizens or groups in the community. But they have a place in the Galapagos Planning Assembly. They have also participated in identifying the milestone and indicators that are in the implementation of the plan for Galapagos 2030, and recently as well funded by the international community, European Union particularly. There are some interesting projects that are being held and developed at the moment with the initiatives that depart from the community. And I make a parenthesis here. On Wednesday next week, my class will be listening directly from Galapagos, the key actors that are involved in this last effort. So a few recommendations after COVID 2019. We need to diversify the economy of the islands for better resilience. Putting the eggs in just one basket, like tourism, we're going to suffer if another of these external factors like a pandemic strikes us again. We need to articulate land-based tourism, the ones that arrive to the towns, with the ones that are regulated by the national park. You know, those two models need to get closer together if we are to diminish the pressure on the ecosystems and the social systems too. The municipalities, they need to work together. They must get together, even though they do it at the Galapagos Government Council, they tend to take individual actions, and there's lots of opportunities if they would work together. Not to let business as usual take over again. We shouldn't go back to what it was before 2019. We need to act, we need to be innovative, and we need to be persistent in having different ways in order to achieve sustainability. And last but not least, reinforce the community participation and decision making based on scientific and technical information, which is out there. We've shown that this study comes from 2013, 2014, and very little has been done. So there is a need to push that from the bottom up and use the scientific and technical information. And now with that, I want to just go down to the research that I, with the help of some key and enthusiastic students, started this last quarter. And this is related with sustainability of the island of Floreana in the Galapagos, which is the one that is shown right down at the bottom of the archipelago. So why Floreana? Because Floreana is going through a big project of ecological restoration. This project started in 2012, so it's going to be 10 years already, in the making for the final initial hit, which would be the eradication of rats and cats that are affecting the nature and of course the productivity of the islands. And it's an island that has 145 inhabitants. Some of them flee after COVID. It was about 180, so 40 just maybe they are returning, but that's the last date from 2021 that I have. And they have farming, tourism, and fishing that could be eventually changed with the Floreana project of rewilding this island. Possible implications of the project: new and different ways of living for the local population of Floreana, new dynamics of functionality of the socio-ecological system. Imagine rewilding native species, more than 15 species of birds, and reptiles are already there on the works to be repopulated. I think early next year, giant tortoises will be put back on the islands. And that was since Darwin noticed that there were very little, just no more giant tortoises. So can you imagine? That would be fantastic. And it will create big expectations to visit the island of Floreana. I would love to go there. So those are the implications of the projects, and definitely the socio-ecological system needs to be into consideration. So in my time at Stanford, and thanks to the Center for Latin American Studies and the program in human biology of Stanford University, I proposed a research to bring the concept of sustainability into the project, into the rewilding of Floreana. Before coming here, I spoke with the director of the Galapagos National Park, Danny Rueda, and the leader of the project, born in Galapagos, Eliezer Cruz, and they agreed we needed to insert this concept into the big picture of the project itself. So the idea is to identify tools to understand and help achieve sustainability of the island, predict what could happen, and assess. And that was, of course, with the help of students as research assistants and inputs from colleagues at Stanford and a key stakeholder from Floreana Island. And definitely the information provided by the Floreana project in knowledge of the Galapagos National Park Directorate in the help of Coco Toco Foundation. So Floreana as a complex social ecosystem, it needs to be recognized. We planted research questions. So what are the most important parameters or variables for sustainability of Floreana? What are those tools that could be brought into the equations to guide the understanding and the pursuit of sustainability within the project of rewilding Floreana? So with that information provided by the stakeholders, which included various studies and lots of reports that included the academia and the participation of the small community of Floreana, we used that data, we put it together, we analyzed it, we did a short theory of change exercise to understand better the future of Floreana. What are those elements that we considered important? We had the feedback from Mr. Eliezer Cruz, the leader of the project, and then that served us as an input to start to initiate the first loop diagrams to generate the dynamic model for Floreana, and also inputs with the help of the donut economy model theory, combined those two to then have a scenarios for sustainability with some indicators and limits for the island. So with that, and taking into consideration, we saw this graph before, but this is for Floreana, the center is the restoration project, and that is really what would have the effect on these other elements that are around the restoration project. So with that complexity, we produced and we selected the most important ones that we thought in the discussions. These four initial drawings or systems, very, very casual loop systems as governance, biodiversity, water, and tourism. Each of those are explained. And then we also identified some of the initial indicators, 6 for the environmental arena and 12 for the social boundaries or the social system. And this is how hard the team was working in action. in order to produce this. So next steps on the Floreana research: obtain feedback from colleagues, from you, from out there, identify more gaps of information, present this initial work to the community of Floreana and key institutional stakeholders, and with that then formulate a project with the participation and ownership of the people of Floreana. So the last one is the remarks about my presentation. The concept of Galapagos as a social ecosystem is now accepted. Sustainable development has been introduced, embedded into the regional planning for Galapagos and in its implementation. However, the responses to the studies are still very slow. We don't have much time to lose, so information is there and actions and political decisions are needed. The institutionalization of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are already there, and there's some activities that are happening. So from this a scenario of instability, we would like to reach a scenario of stability and three pillars correlating to each other in under a good governance. Acknowledgements to institutions and people that helped me to put this together, and the information provided. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Arturo. We have time for a couple of questions while we're still broadcasting on the YouTube. I do want to start first by reading a couple of the reactions there. There are more congratulations. Alejandra Mejia Restrepo thanks you for showing this very complex view of Galapagos that includes the human aspects, together with, I assume, the environmental ones and the kind of challenges faced. There is also this beautiful reaction where you were talking about rewilding of Floreana, which is just a lot of claps and no words. And finally, there's also Sarah Ferguson, who's telling you, thank you so much, Dr. Usurieta, for an excellent presentation. But if there are questions, please put them on the YouTube chat, and let's open now to the room here. The first question, maybe. Yes, Mike. Go ahead.
It's very well. Thank you for your presentation. My question is frankly quite a selfish one, in that the Galapagos look amazing, right? You know, they're this amazing ecosystem. I would love to go there. Is there any way in doing tourism well, or is your message, if you really care about it, don't go? You know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of finding myself stuck. I'm wondering, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I have been asked that question many times, and the way we're going, I think, planetary speaking, there are a few places that still have unique characteristics and haven't been altered. So I would say, go and be a good tourist. You know, when you go there, you apply the sustainability concepts, the ethics of living in this planet, because it's a fragile place. So if you go there and try to help as well, you know, we like visitors that come there with good attitude, and even think about, you know, becoming a volunteer. So my question is, yes, you just have to be a good tourist. It is up to us, or it's up to the local governments and the community to really articulate actions in order to really manage properly the tourism and don't fall into the abysm of having big questions like the ones we've seen during this presentation.
We have a question on the chat from Kira Mills. She also congratulates you, thank you so much for a great presentation. But she's asking about in these cities or in these towns, in public areas in particular, are there any thoughts you have on noise pollution?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Yes, the island of Santa Cruz, the town of Puerto Ayora, is, because of it's centralized and good or bad, the Charles Darwin Research Station, the headquarters of the Galapagos National Park, somehow those elements generated the interest of many people, and the population growth itself has been a lot more than the other ones. Apart that the airport is nearby, or the first airport, because now there's another airport on the other end. But noise pollution, yes, you're starting to hear, and it's a shame. There are norms there, but the reinforcement of the norms are very weak. But there's not only noise pollution, now we're starting to see light pollution at night. And there is an interesting movement of locals that are going into the municipality and trying to complain. So somehow, yes, it's showing, but at the same time, there is counteractions in order to avoid that. But thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful and engaging presentation. It was we're so lucky to get to hear from you and have you on campus this quarters. So I saw in one of the slides from the presentation that there was a kind of pamphlet that talked about when we leave, and if I understand correctly, that is related also to the Quechua concept of summa causa. And I was wondering, yes,
The when we leave, yeah.
I'll admit that I don't know a ton about that kind of indigenous framework of thinking, but could you speak to the role of summa causa in
this one, right?
Yes, right,
Yes.
right.
When we, yeah.
In kind of the planning around sustainable development in Galapagos and maybe more broadly in Ecuador and that kind of culture.
Can you make it big?
I'm trying to.
Just click on that one.
There you
Because then Sarah can
go.
show
Okay.
it. There we go.
Okay. El buen vivir, summa causa comes from a Quechua word. It's called buen vivir, good living. And it was adopted in the Constitution of Ecuador in 2008. And there's another interesting element. Ecuador is the first country that within its constitution provides the rights for nature. And it has taken quite a bit of time in order to get nature defending its rights with the help of us or the groups that care for nature. But the summa causa was absorbed in the Galapagos because it's part of the constitution, but because for a regional planning, like the protected areas of Galapagos, which cover 97% of the territorial and 100% of the maritime, they were guided by the national planning strategy, which the summa causa was also inserted. So it is aligned with the national way in which the planning was carried out at that time, and I think it's a good concept, and somehow still being applied because it's part of sustainability, of sustainable development, pretty much. I don't know if that answered you the question.
Okay. Go ahead.
We applaud your efforts to bring sustainability into rewilding, to involve the local population, to give us a more balanced three-pillar approach to sustainability. All those things are wonderful. We hope your model will work and be useful and serve the participants as well as the intellectual leaders. The question is, what do you think it will tell us? Do you have a hunch about what we will learn from your model? Let's assume it's really successful and it works and you get all the data you need. What will we learn from it, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a bit early, but let me just answer this after going with a thought before that. And it is when we started, and I say we because we're a team, although I was directing it, but nevertheless the the thoughts from the team were very important. We think of doing this not much of a complex way of seeing the sustainability of Floreana and how to understand it and implement actions to achieve sustainability. Because this could require, a platform where you insert, when you have the data, and if there's time to do it, the possibility of doing it, yes. The challenge, I guess, and this is something that, with an agreed extension of my professorship here, is to see which are the ways in which we can foresee sustainability, identify these elements, but make it more simple so the local community can really endorse the process and have it more practical. Because when you go with these things and you see that the loops and how can we that translate it into an easier way of understanding and having a simple way of collecting information with the words of the local community that can feed back into the system, where without the VinSim project and the logarithms and things that would project the things, we can find a simple way of doing it, which it could be possible. So that would be my selling to the local communities. The challenge is big because with the complexity of a social ecosystem, which is Floreana, data and science needs to be brought in, but social science as well. Communication is science, and how we can change the chip and make it work. That's the way I see it. I mean, this is just the simpler way we found, and we discussed it, Danny. How can we just be simple? And probably these casual loops, this is as far as we could go, and just let's see what are the things that we can do there, and how can we check the changes of this. That's a challenge.
Do you guess it will suggest more tourism to Floreana or less tourism to Floreana?
Well, my thinking is that there will be more interest, but it will be up to the local people to allow for that amount of people to go to Floreana, because nowadays pretty much is 148 people, and all the hotels or hostels and restaurants, they have a system. They have a community system by which, okay, we have 4 groups today. There's 8 hotels. Now these 4 hotels will receive, it's now their turn. So they alternate, But if they see that there's more people, would they sell the land to others? Would they allow investments or other sort of activities that would compete with them and allow for more people coming, and then we'll have more transport, more water demand, more waste management. So I foresee more interests. And these are the warnings that we would like to put on the community so they are alerted, and maybe actions to prevent that could come into place.
So I want to bring in one more question from the broadcast, and then we're going to have to stop the streaming. But Gina Pacaldo, she says it's a basic question. I don't think it's basic. Mm-hmm. It's very, very interesting in light of what we just said about the Buen Vivir. What is the history of the indigenous peoples of Galapagos, or the current residents in terms of their indigenous backgrounds?
Yes. Interesting question, and thank you. Indigenous people, I mean, as I mentioned before, Galapagos was not inhabited, not even in pre-colonial times. But in the recently migration period, some indigenous communities flee to Galapagos, particularly from the province of Tungurahua, where in the late 1940s there was a big earthquake. So they looked for other places, and there was a big colony of Tungurahuenses and from indigenous communities of that province. And province nearby, they suffer from the earthquake as well. There is some representation from the north province of Imbabura, the Otavaleños, the Otavalos, that are there, people that like the commerce very much. They are very, very into the commerce of folklore things and so on. So they do have a role. They have an organized group that they're trying to come up with a local school that would teach Quechua. So there are efforts, at least on Santa Cruz Island. There are other representatives, but less numbers on the other inhabited islands. But Santa Cruz themselves, there is quite an interesting representation of them. And their folkloric dances are shown every Friday at the main street as part of the cultural day for the tourists as well. Yes.
So, thank you, Arturo. I do want, before we thank you, remind everyone that we are having our Friday seminar as usual next Friday with Marike Winchell, who's going to talk about servitude afterlives in Bolivia. But before that, on Thursday, we have a special event with it will be a screening in McMurphy in the art building with filmmaker Roberto Hernandez, who is visiting scholar in the Humanities Center. He's the director of Presunto Culpable, which is Mexico's kind of most highly viewed documentary of all time. So I recommend you to go. That's Thursday at 4:30 next week. But thank you so much, Arturo.
Thank you. Thank you.